Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Career Tea. I'm your host Sohrab, and today we're sitting down with Lawrence Osai, whose career journey spans finance, consulting, cybersecurity, and product management. He's worked at major firms like Deloitte, EY-Parthenon, moved on to ServiceNow, and has also completed an MBA at Columbia Business School. We want to dive into the why behind each step, the environment of these big names, and the lessons you can apply to your own path. Lawrence, welcome to Career Tea. How are you doing today?
Good, Saurabh. Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Of course, great to have you here. I'm excited to hear about your journey, your career path, and give some lessons back to our listeners. So let's dive right in. Let's start by your early journey. You attended RIT as your undergrad, studied electrical and electronics engineering, and later on, after you started your career, you pursued an MBA at Columbia Business School. But I want to touch base first at RIT. What made you choose RIT engineering, but also the more specific area of electronic and electrical engineering? Because there's multiple different, focuses in engineering that you could choose.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I think really it came down to, at the time, my passion was really around gaming. So I actually had started at RIT with, call it software engineering, but really the focus was trying to get into like the gaming side of things. And really within like the first 2 quarters, we're on the quarter system, I think it was very clear that like I didn't have any programming experience. So I was sort of starting at this deficit from most people in the class who had taken some sort of programming in high school. So my first quarter, the GPA was good. Second quarter, it was a little bit not like it was still above the thresholds for like scholarship to keep scholarships and stuff. But my roommate at the time was doing electrical and we had, similar passions, similar interests, as well as similar strengths. And I just talked to an academic advisor. They were like, listen, your strengths are math, physics, the sciences, programming. Yes, it's logically similar. Like it's logical, right? It's all about logic, but they were like, go for something a little bit more quantitative. If your concerns were grades, which they were at that time. So yeah, that was the switch from software to electrical. And electrical, I think really just played into the subjects I loved the most. There was math and physics and
Yeah. Was there at any point when you switched over to engineering where you were like, damn, maybe I should have stayed in computer science? Maybe I shouldn't have continued
the
engineering?
thing with RIT is software engineering and electrical engineering. At the start, we took a lot of the same classes. The branch out point was like when you get to like more complex math classes, more complex physics. So I actually still took a lot of the core classes that engineers took. So the transition was easy. Looking back, there were a couple software engineering classes that I really wanted to go deeper into, but your schedule is already laid out by your major. So I didn't, so that's the only part I wish there was like a lot of like the logical thinking classes that I wanted to go further in, but electrical schedule was packed and then the co-op opportunities as well. So between both of those, I didn't really have a chance to even look back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. So while you were studying undergrad, did you have an idea that later on you potentially want to go towards more the business route and potentially pursue your MBA, or is that decision something that came later down the line?
So in my case, it came after doing my first internship. Like I mentioned, when I was now in electrical engineering, my first internship was at a company called Diebold. They make ATMs. And I was doing regular electrical engineering, controls testing, all that type of stuff. And I was there for about 4 or 5 months. And I think the consistent theme was like, I just kept talking to people around me and I was like, what's a day in the life? How long have you been doing this? And it became clear to me, like, a day in the life was like a fairly repetitive set of tasks that were mainly around like testing that things worked as they should, or maybe just drawing new designs, things like that. So like after that internship, I came back and I was like, let me try to see the business. It's obviously really hard to get an internship. I was fortunate enough. My sister was a software engineer at Goldman. So she put in a referral for me. And then I went on their tech infrastructure team, which is the guys that do the back end stuff at Goldman. And that's where I started on you call it business side, but I was still on the support side of the business. But yeah.
Got it. So for our listeners who might be considering like a similar path, right, who might be engineering undergrad, but kind of thinking of going towards an MBA later on, what kind of like skill sets and mindset do you think, you were developing earlier on that kind of helped you, start your, career at Goldman and kind of kind of pivoting towards that business side? Maybe at the time you weren't thinking about those skill sets you were building, but if you think back now, do you have some skills
Yeah.
that you had developed?
I think, yeah, definitely. So at Goldman, and even when I moved into consulting, ultimately, I think the biggest thing was working cross-functionally. So the moment my first project at Goldman involved me working with like the people doing trading, the people doing pricing, the people doing strategy, like at that point, that's where I realized like, oh, I actually sort of enjoy working with different types of people who solve different types of problems. In engineering, I don't think I had that much cross-functional sort of. So I think if you're someone who finds yourself like thinking about different types of problems and wanting to solve it collectively, I think that was something that stood out very, very, very early on. And maybe the second thing was very early. I have I'm fortunate enough, I have four older siblings. They would always talk to me about being closer to where the money is made. And they would explain to me like, if you're at an engineering company, of course, the money is being made in the product, like whatever you build, the hardware. And they would always tell me on the business side, the technology and everything else enables the business. And the business as it is whatever service you're providing to your customers or whatever the case may be, right? But, the closer you are to where the revenue is generated, they always said, that's the best opportunities for career advancement, for like leadership. And so again, not to like, those are two separate paths that one is more suited to the other. But I think, in my opinion, having been an engineer and seen under the hood of an engineering company, if I was going to come closer to the business, I wanted to be less in sort of like the support function, but more in like the functions that are closer to the customers and the end product. So that was my logic.
Makes sense. And it's nice you have four older siblings, so you got plenty of
Yeah.
knowledge and inspiration coming your way.
Yeah.
So you mentioned consulting, which kind of leads to my next question. Right after your undergrad, your first, I guess, full-time was at Deloitte, which you spent 6 years there overall in technology, risk, and cybersecurity. As we know, Deloitte is known for its client-facing culture and broad consulting exposure. So what initially, I guess, attracted you towards Deloitte? Deloitte being one of the big four. I'm sure you are probably considering maybe other consulting firms or maybe some of the other big four. So what kind of attracted you towards Deloitte, and what was it like stepping into that, big consulting giant?
Yeah. So to be completely candid, Deloitte was very happenstance in that closer to graduation, I think a bunch of us engineers that were like not really looking for engineering roles, the easiest way through the career office was like going to job fairs. So I ended up going to the NSB, National Society of Black Engineering Conference in Anaheim. I think it was in Los Angeles at the time. So basically I'd walked around the booths, you talk to some engineering companies, you try to explain you want to be maybe not an electrical engineer, maybe doing something different. But really the one or two companies that were like open door hiring regardless of skill set were consulting firms, because I think traditionally consulting firms have always said if you think in a certain type of way, they want you versus what your background is. So I was at a dinner the first night of the conference, and a lady basically talked to me and she was like, hey, you might be a good fit for Deloitte. I heard they have open roles. So yeah, I went to their booth the next day, and it was a sell on like, hey, I'm an engineer by trade, but I don't see myself as an engineer full time. And yeah, that's how I got Deloitte. Obviously there was some casework and case prep that I had to do, but they aligned me themselves to cybersecurity and tech risk at the time, because they were sort of growing out that function, and they wanted people that understood technicals. So not necessarily, you came from cybersecurity, but they were like, if you understand technology, the related risks with, software and hardware, then you should be able to at least fit into the group. And that's how I started in the group. And your second question was around the experience of it. And I think the learning curve was massive, right? Because consulting, like I said, it's people skills. Then when it's a technical skill, especially, there's that learning curve of like, I didn't study cybersecurity. So I basically, like everything consulting, your team is everything. So I got lucky enough to find a senior manager. He took me under his wing, taught me the ins and outs of security for the first 4 years. And the same guy took me into data privacy which was sort of becoming big at the time with a lot of regulations coming up. I basically aligned myself to him and the folks he would work with. And he really was responsible for a lot of my success today. Until today, he's still one of my biggest mentors. Just, goes back to the effect of people. Within some of these big organizations. You can either be really unlucky, which happens all the time because there's so many people, or you find someone who just likes you, finds you coachable, and kind of brings you up. So that was my key to success, if you will, at Deloitte.
Yeah, makes sense. And I mean, you were there for 6 years. So, a lot of times when I hear people that are at the Big Four, I have heard, I used to be at EY. A lot of people say you got to be at the Big Four for 2 to 3 years, gain experience, and then bounce, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
You were there for 6 years, right? So what is your thought on that? I guess, let's say if there's younger people right now hearing that a lot, maybe they're deciding to go to a Big Four, but other people are telling them, okay, be there for 2 to 3 years and then get out, go somewhere else. What's your thought on that? Should they stay there longer, like you there for 6 years, or do you think they should gain as much experience as they can in short period of time, like 2, 3 years, and then go take it somewhere else?
Yeah.
Or stay longer?
I definitely have advice on that. My situation was actually really unique in that, I actually had to stay at Deloitte because I was processing my first thing, I started on a work visa. So to transition from the work visa to the green card, Deloitte sponsored that process. So basically I was tied to the hip because those processes were tying me down, if you will, right? I could leave those processes, but I would have to go to a company that would reinitiate everything. So I was sort of stuck. But I did, after getting a couple of visa renewals, I tried to explore opportunities. And it goes back to that mentor I told you about. And some of the things he kept telling me, which turned out to be true, where, the longer I stayed, because I now had my sort of core team that I was working with, he kept showing me through projects, different industries. So, I did stuff with retail. I did stuff in healthcare. I did stuff in financial services. I did consumer products. I did gas stations. I did all sorts of projects and magazines, the full gamut. And what he had told me as a pitch for wanting me to stay, aside from all my immigration stuff I had going on, was he's like, you started this job really young, and a lot of consulting comes down to the breadth of experience. He kept saying, if you leave after 2, 3 years, that's fine. Maybe you really know it's not for you. But he's like, for as long as you feel like there's learning opportunity, it's great to learn different industries, how they work, the different problems they have. And while it sounds like your role is cybersecurity and stuff, but typically, the scope of work for a project starts with you understanding what that company fundamentally does, right? So I spent a good chunk of those 6 years really learning so much about these different industries. And then, luckily the immigration stuff was working in parallel. So at some point the paperwork came, and then I was like, okay, well, I've learned enough. Business school is next. It was always next for me. It was just, I wanted the immigration stuff. I was kind of moving. I kind of had this rough roadmap in my mind. And my advice to people is, I think it looks very different for everybody. I'm one of those people that hates to give bucket advice that's applicable and say this is for everybody. But I think contextualizing your situation is very important, because what those big companies, the consulting and such, offer you is a lot of times great learning experiences, like I said. Second thing is huge network. And the people you meet there, so many routes they end up going, you benefit from having those people in your back pocket. And then I think the third thing, which was very common at the time I started, was travel. I got to see a ton of America, which I would never have seen otherwise through consulting. And even the nature of the clients, a client in Oklahoma, a client in Arkansas is very different from a client in Kentucky and a client in Vermont. And just understanding those work cultures, learning a lot about those people themselves, what they value. I think there's a lot of, non-career benefits to consulting. And to the traditional advice of 2, 3 years and bounce, maybe that would be more of the stress component of the job and managing, work life and all that. And I think it's also important to think about yourself and work life, drawing boundaries. I was fortunate enough, that mentor I talked about, he had a very sort of structured way of, we travel X day, we come back X day. When we travel and we leave the client, we don't sit for hours and socialize unless we're with the client. He'll let you go, do your thing. And then in the morning, he'll give you a buffer time in case you went home, you were tired. In the morning, you can pick up work. So he had that flexibility baked into how we worked as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And was the reason why I just aligned myself to him. But I understand that's not always the case in consulting. And it's very important to know your situation, know what works for you, and then tailor it. That's my advice, at least. There are benefits, but understand those benefits relative to your situation.
Makes sense. If you didn't have your visa situation, right? Because and now, especially after COVID time, a lot of like the travel for consulting firms has like decreased, right? A lot, like traveling's gone down a lot. Let's say you didn't have your visa situation and you were in now time where there wasn't as much travel, would you have still wait that much towards, being at a consulting firm for that long if you weren't getting those benefits of, experiences of meeting different clients from different parts of the country and whatnot?
It's tough to say, but I would say I would have definitely probably looked to leave after like 5 years. So I stayed, I felt it too. That last year was a bit of a drag, which is kind of why I went to Parthenon, actually. We can talk more about that. But really, once I switched context from like, okay, I've done, cyber strategy, I've done cyber assessments, I've done tech strategy, I've done all these different things at different companies. By 4 years in, the only thing that you realize is you sell work based on what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
So it started becoming a lot of like, I'm not going to call it rinse and repeat, of course, but it's, you had an idea of what your deliverable would look like from day one. You kind of knew what you needed to do. You go and get the work done. But once data privacy came into the equation, I actually felt like I was stimulated again because I started learning new regulations. I started learning what that meant for potentially new customers. It sort of became this whole new branch of work that we were selling. So I was actually quite stimulated, and that came in like 3.5, 4 years in. So I was actually I enjoyed that 1 year. The problem is that 1 year was a grind because you're figuring out a new space with clients who also are new. Like everybody is new to this whole, compliance with California Consumer Protection Act, GDPR in Europe, all these different laws that were coming. So what made it really hard was you're learning, but you're kind of like, what's that saying? I think it's like building the bridge and walking on it or whatever they say. So that year was rough. Like I physically was drained with all the travel and everything. So at that point, I was really like, okay, maybe it is time. In hindsight, 5 years was probably the point I would have tapped out. But I never thought I was really tapping out to go to industry. If I'm being honest with you, I think if I tapped out, it was straight to business school.
Got it. Yeah. Makes sense. One last question regarding Deloitte overall before we move on to EY-Parthenon, as you mentioned. When people hear cybersecurity risk consultant and overall cybersecurity, they might think high pressure situations, late night crisis calls, and like big client demands. How accurate is that perception? And also, what kind of an environment did you experience at Deloitte, would you say, day to day? Starting out, I'm assuming you started as like staff, and then probably senior one, and 2 different roles. What was the day to day like at Deloitte? Because, a lot of times people hear that it is cutthroat, fast paced. What was your experience like?
Yeah. So to be completely candid with you, my first, and I think this is very similar for most consultants, my first 2 or 3 projects were pretty rough. Hours wise, if you want to call it imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, the reality is you're new to an entire industry. You have no credibility. And maybe I'll preface this and say something a lot of people don't talk about enough is in consulting, you build credibility, and that credibility and trust is what initially and all the way through earns you projects. Like that's how people want you on their teams. They've heard Saurabh does a great job, so a partner wants you on his team, or so once you don't have that credibility to build it, it's a bit of a grind. And the grind is you telling people that you want it, right? Like you're trying to show the guy who gave you an opportunity while you don't have any experience, so to speak, is, you're trying to prove your worth, do the hours. So the first 2 or 3 projects I struggled. My second project, particularly this partner I worked with, I I remember calls late night to like my siblings, like, I absolutely hate my life. I hate this, blah, blah. But let me tell you the bright side of consulting. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Every project has an end date. That was the best feeling in the world because, okay, yeah, it was a 6-month project. You're miserable week 2, but you tell yourself back of your mind, you're like, all right, 22 more weeks and I never have to see this guy again, right? And whether you like it or not, funny, at the end of most projects, when you suffer through it and you've built that credibility, as much as you hate or might have hated parts of the experience, you almost feel like them. I mean, I survived. I could, if there's an extension to this work, then I don't have to like go back on the bench and find a new project or like reach out to people. Like, you're like, the devil I know is better than the angel I don't know, So there was a bit of that. And I was able to snap out of it with that guy in particular. And once I aligned to this manager at the time, he was a manager. So he was the one that partners knew like, hey, he gets the job done. And then he would come to us as his like consultants and senior consultants be like, hey, this partner is a good guy to work with, blah, blah, blah. But the key I find in consulting is you got to find the people early that are invested in you and care about you and really want you to succeed and have similar aspirations. But it's really hard to find because the companies are massive. But when you find them, that's where you find a lot of people sort of get stuck and like stick into it, or you don't. And people absolutely like what you said, right? The experience is dreadful. It's really demanding. But you had another question about the nature of the day-to-day. My day-to-day with that manager was very much client-specific. When we're in the middle of the country in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisville, about Utah, I was everywhere in the middle. That whole middle except the Dakotas. I spent a lot of time there with a lot of consumer and industrials clients. We had a work culture where we never wanted the client to feel like we were not aligned with them. So we would do late night work, but we'd always do it at the hotel. Just not sitting in an office where everybody leaves at 3 o'clock till 8. It just looks bad. So we set that precedent between me and him. And then when we're on the East Coast working together, because we had spent so much time on the road, we tended to actually work remote, me and him. We did a lot of really good remote work because we traveled 42 weeks a year. Day to day was sitting in a conference room. Client comes in for meetings. He leaves. Me and him brainstorm. Sometimes we had 3 or 4 in a team, not always 2. And yeah, high pressure, probably I would say 40% of the time. And the other 60% was just really grueling, but necessary stuff, got to get it done. So yeah, that was probably my experience at Deloitte. Mm-hmm. And then when we transition, I'll talk about how it differed from Parthenon because there's definitely huge differences, but that was my Deloitte, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And I like your advice in that, you got to find that 1 or 2 people that really care about your like growth and success and like stay close with them, do good work for them. And, I like your advice as well that the first year, 2 years at the Big Four are probably gonna be miserable.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a lot of learning, a lot of new things. Like I remember like I felt like I didn't know anything because like you really don't. I mean, you're learning so many new things. And a lot of times like the people that on your team, they're more experienced than you. So you're like, wait, should I be knowing all these things?
Yeah.
And so you kind of that maybe like imposter syndrome. But you just got to go through it, and it's normal. It's good to hear that, like, you also went through it, and probably everybody goes through it at the Big Four. So moving to EY-Parthenon next. First, before we get into it, can you explain for those that maybe don't know or haven't heard, why the Parthenon? Now a lot of people refer to it as just EY or Ernst & Young, but why the Parthenon after EY?
So Parthenon was a small company that EY acquired, and it's their strategy arm. So really, it was meant to compete with the traditional, like, if you want to call it MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, doing like strategy work, M&A work, things like that. So it was sort of like a broaden EY's offerings and then sort of position yourself in a more competitive market space where you can command more money for like offering, higher quality of service, or a lot of times because it was also M&A work. A lot of your compensation was based on the size of the deals and things like that. So that's the difference between the traditional like EY consulting where, your consulting is broken down into like financial, technology, when your strategy arm is core strategy consulting, M&A work, deal work, all that type of stuff. So that's sort of the difference between both.
Yeah. So you joined EY-Parthenon as a senior consultant, and as you mentioned, you were focusing on cyber M&A due diligence for private equity buyers. And EY-Parthenon, known as, they were known for strategy consulting and private equity engagements, as you just mentioned. How did that differ, the environments and the work differ from that of Deloitte's? And, they are like out of the big four, I would say like EY and Deloitte are kind of like the top competitors, I would say. A lot of people make the jump between the two. What made you decide to make that jump?
Yeah. I'll start with the last question first. So the last question sort of builds on a lot of what I talked to you earlier about, like what I was mentioning about like relationships. So my very first project where after I got promoted at Deloitte, I worked with a big team where the company that provides the SATs were at their office in DC for 6 months. And we're like, all of us came on the project because, we've all shared common experience, trauma of the SATs. It'll be beautiful to work for like the company that administers this exam that killed us all at some point.
Make them go bankrupt.
Yeah, I know, come with the worst intentions. Yeah. So all of us got there and we're like, wait, we really like, we're in Virginia, Northern Virginia. We liked the customer or the client. We really liked their work environment. So one of the guys from that team and I stayed in touch and we actually became really close friends. Personal life, he started like a huge nonprofit down in Central America, which had like, a lot of work that they were doing was stuff that I'm really passionate about. So I became like a partner with him and helping him execute on some projects. So we just became really close. And at some point I went on with this other manager, like I mentioned, who was on the same project to do other things. And he branched off to another manager and I checked in with him every week. And during COVID, he got bored of Deloitte, was like, hey, this new group is starting at, EY-Parthenon. He dropped the numbers and I was like, that's unreasonable. Like, why would they pay you that much? Like, I'm like, bro, I know you shouldn't be making that much money. And he's like, it's a new group. They're trying to grow it grounds up. Let me know if you want to come. And yeah, like I mentioned, the immigration stuff finally got to a point where I could move on and the business school gears were already rolling, taking the GMAT, started the application process. So I was like, oh, good time to take a risk. So I hit him up and I was like, hey, all the other admin background stuff is slowed down. Can you talk to me a bit more about what you're doing? And he talked to me about it and I was like, it's not much different from what I'm doing. It's just, the clients you're working with are different. And the nature of the job is very different. And yeah, I interviewed. I mean, it was a weird interview because they're growing the team. So they were basically poaching. So by the time you get called for an interview, you'll most likely get in the role because they really just needed people with prior experience. And most of us, if I'm being honest, with a team of 18, I think 13 of us were from Deloitte, the same group within Deloitte as well. So it's like they knew the secret sauce was the compensation, really. It's like they were giving people 60, 70% raises. So people were like, well, listen, yeah, even if I don't know what you're talking about
It's hard not to accept that.
Well, I think everyone was also like, at that point, it was becoming a grind during like around COVID, like consulting had switched to fully virtual. The hours were really long. So it's like, if I'm going to do these hours, might as well, get paid for them. And it's a new group. So you get to set the expectations in a way, So the second question you had was, so that's the transition. It was, that guy, he basically brought at least 4 of us or 5 of us over from Deloitte. I was the second one he brought and we kept growing the team. I brought in another 2 people and it became this whole pipeline. They eventually stopped poaching. I'm sure Deloitte must have reached out and said, listen, we have no one left in the senior consultant.
Please stop.
Yeah, you guys need to stop. So the nature of the job. So the difference is, I'll just give you 2-second overview of both jobs. So like I told you on the Deloitte side, because it's advisory and you're doing it with such a technical lens of cybersecurity and tech risk, what you're doing is like you're understanding people's, like for the cybersecurity part is like what sensitive information do you have and how do we protect it? And then on the technology side, it's like what's your tech stack? What's your software stack? Like how do we protect intellectual property, whatever it is, like mitigate attacks, downtime, outages, all that stuff. Now, when we come to Parthenon, the group that was spun up was actually sort of a subgroup of what they were calling like deal tech. What deal tech does is when they're working with private equities that want to buy companies, they'll bring in deal tech to say, hey, this company makes XYZ type of software. You guys come in, look through, poke holes, let us know if this is viable, let us know if the code looks good, let us know, any vulnerabilities, blah, blah, blah. But because cybersecurity was becoming so important, our team was the team that you come in and they say, hey, cybersecurity and data privacy, give us like a quick synopsis of this company. Are there any major risks? Are there any blockers? So we weren't obviously the financial due diligence. That's the most important, right? Like, am I going to make, like, if I buy these guys, can I sell them in 5 years for X amount? But where we came in was more like the pricing, like the price of the target companies. So if we know that they had recently had a breach or there was material cybersecurity risk, sometimes we would go to the private equities and say, hey, this could be some cost savings for you if you like negotiate down the price, or you're going to have to spend substantial investment in staying their like cybersecurity profile and stuff. So very similar, but just because the audiences are different. One, Deloitte, you're going directly to a company that brought you in. Here, you're obviously acting on behalf of a private equity. Sometimes we're actually acting on behalf of companies as well, like companies looking to acquire other companies. It was a very on environment. They told me in my interview, and it turned out to be true. It's a 24-hour a day job. Like I said, the compensation was the biggest draw in. The opportunity was another draw in. White space, right? New group, shaping the whole thing. You get to come in, tell us where you see how we can be better, all that stuff. So the 24/7 nature of it was really hard, let me tell you, bro, because when that private equity company reaches out and they're like, hey, due diligence closes in 2 days. We need a quick cyber assessment done, and data privacy and cyber insurance. So let us know. Now you have 48 hours to like schedule a call, understand their whole environment. They give you a data room, right? You go through the data room, all their artifacts, map those against the different frameworks we had. What are the gaps? Then you have to now, because it's private equity, there has to be a cost associated. So that was the difference. Back in my day, you put some cost on some things, technology that is, but a lot of times it was compliance driven, if I'm being honest, like maybe regulatory driven. But here it's like the P's are like, okay, give me a red, a yellow, or green, and give me the costs. Like if it's green, are you saying I'm going to have to spend 400 to 800K? If it's red, are you saying I have to spend double-digit millions? So doing that whole thing, typically in 48 to 72 hours, was an absolute grind. But like I said, the opportunities I saw post this, like having done this, having it on your resume, the experience, I was like thinking ahead. And if I'm being honest with you, yet again, I had light at the end of the tunnel because I knew I was going to business schools. Yeah. So I was like, grind, and then business school is going to come around and I'll forget about this grind. So
yeah, grind, get the money. It'll be worth it.
Oh, the money meant everything at that point because I'm about to not earn money for 2 years in business school. So
it's good to make it now.
Yeah. Let me stack up now. Yeah.
So as you mentioned, business school now, my next question is, while all of this is going on, you decide to pursue MBA school and you essentially applied and went to Columbia Business School. Were you considering other business schools as well? What kind of drew you to Columbia? If there are students out there kind of deciding between one or two business schools, one of them being Columbia, what drew you there?
Yeah. So I'll just give you the context behind why business school. Why business school was, it goes back to when we started to talk about like engineering and the core skill sets you develop, technical skills. I always felt like I always had like that aptitude for like, applying that in like a more real, what I felt like was more real setting, which is like being closer to like the dollars and like where decisions are made. And I felt like business school was a good way to, number one, pivot, number two, complement the engineering skill set. Because the pivot opportunities are really hard without some avenue, and business school tends to sometimes serve as that avenue. Why Columbia? So I applied to a bunch of schools. This is a very weird one. I got 4 full rides. None of them was Columbia.
Wow.
And I chose Columbia. I'll tell you why. So I think somewhere in the process, I used a program called the Management Leadership for Tomorrow, MLT. They basically help position minority applicants into these business schools, and they do a prep program for business school. So shout out my coach, Shannon. She was the absolute best because this whole decision matrix, and as you can imagine, it's impossible to think through all the scenarios. But what we're able to do was essentially boil everything down to what are your post business school career ambitions, right? Like, of course, the world is your oyster. You can decide to go become a banker. You can become whatever you want, right? Business school opens that platform, but realistically, can you narrow it down to a few options? And I was able to do that. And most options I was thinking about were in the tech space, either startup or mature companies. And she was like, okay, where are the major tech hubs? Let's put remote aside, just where they're physically located. It came down to the West Coast and the East Coast, right? I had no West Coast schools on my list. I wasn't willing to go that far for business school. So naturally, all roads in my mind, all the schools I told you about were now mostly East, North, and Southeast. But I kept telling myself, all roads will lead back to New York for career. So why not cut straight to the chase and, go to a school that's in the area you're most likely going to come back to work in.
Yeah.
Given that West Coast schools tend to hire from the West Coast, West Coast companies hire from West Coast schools, East Coast companies tend to hire from East Coast schools. So that was my logic boiled down. There was a bunch of other variables in there, like the scholarship I got from Columbia. My community is in New York. I've been in New York at that point for like 6.5 years. And all my people, everything social, everything family, my sister is here, my brother-in-law is here. So I had roots in New York. I thought I wanted to leave them, but it always sounds better in theory. And when Columbia opportunity came along, I was like, just think objectively. If you're going to be back here, do you want to leave for 20 months and then come back?
Yeah. And you mentioned there was 4 schools that you applied to or 4 other ones. I'm guessing they were all East Coast as well?
Yeah, so I applied to Kellogg, Wharton, Columbia, Fuqua, Duke, Virginia, Darden. I got in the last one.
That's all right.
MIT Sloan, I think it was. No. Eastern. Yeah.
Nice.
I applied to both schools in New York, yeah.
So you mentioned that you got quite a few nice scholarships to these schools, some full rides, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were not by accident, right? So if there are students out there or even young professionals who are potentially looking to do a pivot to MBA schools, what do you think increased your chances of getting a full ride, but even getting like really nice scholarships, right? What can they do to give themselves the best chance of getting a similar opportunity?
Yeah, I actually do a lot of mentorship for business school students on the side now. And the 3 things I always tell people is it's very easy to focus on. It's a 3-pronged matrix. Academics, which is your GMAT and your undergrad. Hopefully after 4 years of work experience, your undergrad, it's in the background, right? Your GMAT score is academic. Let's call, for all intents and purposes, GMAT is academic. Second one is professional, your work experience, type of work you've done, how you're able to tell the story of like what you've done and what you hope to do. That's the second one. I think the third one is extracurricular. So these business schools, because they're preparing you for leadership, ideally they want well-rounded candidates. So those 3 things are like the 3 things that I feel like could position you where, like, I can be very candid with you. I didn't have the highest GMAT of anybody I know, but what I did have was I had Deloitte, I had Parthenon, I had sponsors within those companies that were willing to put in recommendations that said, like my guy who I aligned to at Deloitte was like, listen, stellar guy. He's worked in these different industries, has shown so much leadership potential, leading engineering teams offshore, this, that, and all that. That's, the professional side. So that was Deloitte. Parthenon, the guy who brought me in, was my recommender as well. And then extracurricular, I'll be honest, from like 2017 or 18, because I knew business school was in my future and I enjoy giving back. It's the reason I do this mentorship I told you about. I started doing a lot of community things. Through Deloitte, I was volunteering at this school downtown, teaching algebra on Fridays. I had a volunteer group I started in DC to help kids get into consulting. So I was doing all these extracurricular things that sort of build that image of like who you are as a person, other than your grades and your job. And during COVID, I was fortunate enough to start doing a little bit more extracurriculars, more like my passion. So I started this like soccer group that turned into this like small documentary for ESPN. Little things like that started coming together. And I think those were the things that I told a story about in my essays and in phone calls with admissions officers that made them think, look at the grades, look at the professional experience, look at what he does in community and in his spare time in general. And those are the things that improve your candidacy. So I just like to debunk that myth that it's just the GMAT score, because the GMAT is a critical component, but don't sleep on the fact that professional, extracurricular, especially in this day and age where people put so much into their personal, like, let's say you review restaurants, that's your, you have a blog or whatever. Bring those are things that those are the things the business schools want to hear, because yes, there are some candidates in class that are only smart and lack EQ and they hate everybody, but the majority of the classmates are really just, well-rounded individuals. So
essentially like having an impact on like your community, having an impact wherever you're going to go after business school, being able to like, create a difference, right?
Yeah. So those are three things. And I think that program I told you about, MLT, they helped me frame all that in a way that told the story. So those are three things that really helped me land those scholarships.
Nice. I hope that kind of gives hope to like people out there, because you do hear it often that a lot of people believe that, okay, if you don't have a good GMAT score, you might as well not try. So it's good to hear that, it's not just solely one thing. It is a combination of things. And at the end of the day, you don't know who's the person that's reviewing your application on the other side. They might really want somebody who's, bringing more, to the school, to the communities. Like you said, as long as having a balance between those three categories. That was well said.
Yeah. I also point out one thing that I think is like very specific advice to people. I think whether you're pivoting or staying in the same industry is another thing to consider, because, I think that ends up playing a big role into why your MBA and the cost and justifying all that. So I always tell people, if you're looking to do a career pivot, then automatically you're starting from a position where the value of the MBA and the dollars attached to it are probably higher than somebody who is sort of in the same line of work and maybe just like taking a break or something. So put that context around your why business school, because a lot of that context influences whether you go full-time, virtual, look for scholarships, willing to because, if you really wanted to hard pivot, let's say, I'm just going to give a random, like from a plumber to a banker, it might be worth putting in $300,000, because a plumber would never otherwise become a banker. I'm just giving that an example. So it's always important to understand that.
Yeah, makes sense. So after your MBA experience and experiencing being in the consulting world, you jumped into product management at ServiceNow, focusing on platform security and privacy. So I want to know, what was that, jump back into being from school and going back into full-time work? Now you have your MBA, you have 6 years of experience in consulting. What was ServiceNow like? And for those that are maybe not too familiar with ServiceNow, what is the company culture like? Is it more of a startup feel, or I guess was it when you started there, or was it more like a corporate feel, kind of like Deloitte and EY? And what was the difference between them?
Okay. So I'll start with second question. So ServiceNow culturally, I think at their core, because they're in this like not hyper growth, but sort of like decently fast growth stage right now, they tend to be a startup at heart, but because you have investors and you're a publicly traded company, you have to also like, grow at scale and accelerate and kind of provide business value to your customers and shareholders. So I love the people. The people are generally, either tenured, been here 10 years ago when the company started, 14 years ago, whatever. You have the more of the, it's grown massively in the last 4 years. So most people are like 4 years old, 3 to 4 years old. Really very different, right? Like at their core, it's a lot of techies, laid back, very mission driven. So it's the first company I've ever worked at. I could tell you there are 4 mission statements at the back of my palm, which is absolutely crazy because I've only been here 5 months and I'm already drinking the Kool-Aid. But no, really, they embody their mission, which is why I always remember it. It's like, the people that you work with, like how forthcoming they are, invested in you, your success. Everybody has a laid back approach. Those are the differences in the culture. I think your first question, remind me, it was more around.
Yeah, essentially, what was the difference between, you now go into ServiceNow,
Okay. Yeah.
going from consulting
The
world,
roles. Yeah.
right? The roles, what is ServiceNow day to day, and also like the difference between Deloitte and EY and now ServiceNow.
Okay. So the roles, so as a product manager, and it's the reason I wanted to pivot into it. At least I thought I wanted to. I still do. I'm enjoying it. It goes back to the first thing I told you about working cross-functionally. So it's the most cross-functional job I've ever had. I can to build a product, just like a software product, my product, it's a data product. And, I'm working with my engineers. I'm working with my design, the people that design the interface, my UX designers. I'm working with my data architects. I'm working with legal. I'm working with go-to-market. I'm working with sales. And then I'm also working with customers who are going to actually buy the product. So right there, that's the value chain typically. And that's my value chain today. It's about 7 groups of stakeholders. And within each of those groups, there's like X number of people. So it's a ton of contextualizing, piecing together, problem solving, all that. And then on top of all this, you're the owner of a product. So you have to come up with the vision and the strategy for it. So I joked to my sister the other day, I was like, this feels like I'm doing a whole consulting project. The stuff we did in the US, the stuff we shipped to our offshore team, the stuff that we called like experts for, inputs. Like it feels like I'm doing all of it. But the difference is with consulting, the end result was a deck. But here, the end result is an actual product, like something that a customer wants to buy or a customer buys, something that a customer sees value in because they're paying you multi-year licensing contracts for it. So that's really the difference in the two is like, one of them, the buck ends at when you put in that deliverable or give that, of course, there's strategy work where you do get to do some implementation. Like some of my tech gigs ended with us doing implementation of software. But here, I feel like I'm a product owner through and through. It brings a lot of the skill sets I learned in consulting. It brings a lot of the things I personally enjoy, problem solving, vision, thinking together under one thing. And maybe the most unspoken part of everything is my compensation is tied to the performance of the company, which is amazing because, I just never had skin in the game like that, right? Like if the company does well, you inherently do well. In consulting, I don't think that was the case, right? It was your bonus is a fraction of your base salary, but the years where Deloitte didn't really do well, of course, that percentage is lower, but the years they did great, I don't think I saw all of that greatness in my paycheck, right?
Yeah.
So,
Makes sense. That's a good incentive essentially for you to want to work harder too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Some of these things that you mentioned, I guess I could put them in like a pros and cons list and pretty clear, that you do enjoy a lot the work that you do now because of the benefits that you get too. You grow yourself personally, you add more value to yourself, and essentially in return, you're adding more value to a company. But with that being said, is there anything that you missed about the consulting world or no? You've left that behind and never looking back?
No, it was the thing I told you before about constantly learning about different industries. You miss that the day you leave. I do, at least. And I tell people till today, it's like, there's so many random business models I can tell you about. Like I had a paint company once for 3 months. So paint company, they were doing some system integration work, and they brought us in for like advisory on like some, tech tooling that I don't even remember the scope of the work, but this paint company paid Deloitte, call it $175K. Me and a manager and one consultant were with them for 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I got to understand the paint business, right? Because they were trying to talk to us how they integrate with the guys that do the trucking side of this. And, sometimes I miss that because as much as I told you everything had an end date, mm-hmm. you would always leave at the end date being like, wow, I guess now I know how, Walmart does everything, or how, a healthcare company insurance works, But with this, because you're in industry, everybody says it's like your learning is finite, right? It's within the scope of what the company offers. You can't, what they don't do, you can't learn about. 1, 2, in product, you then kind of obsess over your product, right? You obviously want to know other products around it, what they're doing, how you can work together. But I've slowly, like my whole life is becoming my product and thinking about my product, my customers, the persona that uses my product, So it's definitely 2 worlds, and I miss a part of consulting, the constant learning, switching environments all the time. Mm-hmm. I really miss it. I miss it the most on the really hard days, and the really hard days in my world come around, really big deadlines, or when you're really blocked from being able to like move as quickly as you'd like to. Mm-hmm. I miss that part of consulting. Yeah.
Makes sense. I have two questions for you that are kind of like fun type questions regarding the work that you've done. So the first one is, between the three companies that you've worked at, which one would you say had the best perks overall?
Perks. Man, now that I'm in tech, bro, on the outside looking in, all my siblings are in tech. So I've been looking from the outside in. But being in it, the perks are not even like in consulting. Tech for me is clear because in consulting, it was like oh yeah, you got a $1,000 a year fitness stipend. Oh dude, all my miles from Deloitte, I have status. Bro, what I did for all those miles was basically sell myself to the air for 40 weeks, right? Like I was in the back of a plane for 40 weeks or maybe in the front by the time I've done a year or something. But tech is just off rip. It's like, okay, I think I have like, well, I'm a remote persona, so I can be anywhere. I tend to go to the office because there's free food and the culture is nice, and the office you can wear whatever you want. That's already, first of all, just start with that. Like being able to wear whatever I want. I could do it at some customers, some clients in the middle of the country, but most of my clients on the East, it was, fairly buttoned up, So that's the first thing. And I just love being comfortable. So if you tell me I could wear a t-shirt to work, I'm probably, I don't know, 30% more productive right there. Yeah. So that's some of the perks is work flexibility, obviously the in-office perks like the food, little things like that. I think the other thing is generally the work remote and like not really like the perks here are like, it's you that defines them. Like I have people on my team that are like, hey, every 2 months for the last 2 days, 3 days of the month, we go to a different part of the country. I'll let you know what time zone I'm in. That's just, it's not permission. It's just letting you know how they are and who they are and what enables them live their best life. And I think that integration of personal and work feels amazing. I'm probably not used to it yet because I have unlimited PTO. I've probably taken 6 days off since I started, 5 maybe.
Nice.
But it's because I'm not used to just like when I say unlimited, I mean, as I was talking to you, a guy on my team just sent PTO for Friday.
Yeah.
Like he's out. It's not a request either. It's just, hey, I won't be around, right? So those little things, I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm missing. I think maybe the other thing I'm not pointing out in consulting that I kind of missed was per diem, where you're spending client money every day. It was a nice perk. To be honest with you, after 3 years of you've eaten at, I don't know. Maybe I didn't have clients in New York, so I was the outlier. But when I was in the middle of America, there's only so many fried chicken sandwiches and burgers that were like really revolutionary, right? Like it was good to not spend your money because that also helped you preserve a lot of your actual take-home salary during the week. So I miss some of those perks. But overall, I think tech is just clear. And once it blurs those lines between your personal and work, the whole experience starts to become a lot better.
Yeah, I agree. That kind of aligns with what I hear overall too from friends, peers.
Yeah, I saw some of your podcast guests that were like food and like some of that stuff. Like that, it definitely resonated with me.
Yeah, the tech companies definitely go all out, and also like the unlimited PTO that you mentioned. Like EY for example gave unlimited PTO. It's just the ease of mind. A lot of the times people didn't even take, like, let's say at a regular company, you would have like 20, 25 days per year. People like sometimes didn't even take the 20 days, right? But because sometimes like if you have that 20 days, 25 days, people feel like they should take it. Otherwise they're going to miss it, like otherwise it's going to go to waste. But when it's unlimited PTO, sometimes people just take what they need and it ends up being way less than 20 days anyways, but it's like that ease of mind. Like something comes up, like you said, this Friday, boom, I'm going to take it off. I won't worry about, having to save it for a future date.
For a future. Yeah. I think it has pros and cons, unlimited PTO, but I'll say, actually, I should mention one perk that some tech companies have and some don't. I thought it actually sounded too good to be true. It's a discounted stock purchase option. So what happens is, for my company, for example, every employee, when you start, is eligible for what they call like a stock purchase, call it program, right? And if today we're sitting here and the stock is $100 and in 6 months time, the stock is $500, they pick the lowest price in 6 months and discount that 15%. and give you the stock at today's value. So like if it's 500 today and it was 100 6 months ago, which is the period, the day you signed up, they would give you the stock at $85.
Wow. That's
And
nice.
so that means that $85, you would get like 7 shares, but those 7 shares are worth 600. So right there is like $600 of shares and you at 4,200 of value.
You've
For
already made
it's even like a
yeah.
hypothetical, but like just imagine that amplified, because you can do that twice a year and you can commit up to, I think, 15 to 20% of your salary into that. Oh, yeah, that's a
So
perk. Like,
yeah, so
that's
right
a
there you've
real
already
perk.
made so much money. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So a bunch of people, I heard it's not at every company, but a ton of companies tend to do it. I don't know if you're famously heard about NVIDIA's. NVIDIA's is actually a 2-year look back. So they pick the price of NVIDIA 2 years ago for whenever you join, and they give you your stocks at that price.
Wow.
And NVIDIA has, I don't know what they've done in 2 years, but it's like 1,000x to that. Yeah. So that's one perk that I just keyed into when I started. And, yeah, hopefully at the end of the 6 months, I look back and I'm like, I think I'm at 2.2x. So,
Wow.
not bad. Yeah.
That's great. Hopefully someone's right now considering between ServiceNow and another company and they hear that and they're like,
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully
ServiceNow.
the company is growing. So yeah, I've referred a bunch of people already. The name is getting more out there, but it's B2B. So
Yeah.
you don't hear a lot about it. But yeah.
Nice. So we're coming to our last couple questions. My next question is, if someone's listening right now and considering going into consulting or jumping into product management roles or even like a big tech company, what advice do you have for them? Being very experienced now, having many years of work experience, going back to school, what overall like advice do you have for them in order to be successful going down similar career path and career journey?
Yeah.
And maybe like a big lesson maybe that you've learned during your time.
So I say this a lot in my mentorship things. Use your resume to tell your story. And I'll be very honest with you, Saurabh. The way you outlined my experience to me, I almost forgot my experience that way, because I've had to tell so many different types of stories with my resume for the types of jobs I wanted. So when I wanted to join Parthenon, I basically spun my resume to focus a lot on like the new things that I was launching, new initiatives, how much money I was able to bring into Deloitte, because that's what Parthenon cared about. In the deal business, they wanted to see numbers. They wanted to see that you think in a numbers way versus like, And then when I was applying for product management is about, gathering requirements, prioritizing those requirements, coming up with like an MVP. So I spun all those different things I was doing into that story. So I tell this to my mentees a lot is your resume tells a story, and make sure you use your resume to tell the story for the job you're going for. It's very easy to think polished resume looks good. It can go for strategy, it can go for consulting, it can go for product. No, each job has certain things, especially in this day of using like AI filtering and like all of these things that look for semantic words that will like help minimize the manual review process. I think it's very important to tailor your resume. And I did this exercise with my sister, who was a product manager at Google at the time. Within one iteration of my resume, I was able to land 2 interviews in tech. Not to say it was her direct impact, but I could tell that once I got on those calls, the people were like, oh, you built an MVP at Parthenon? Tell me about that. What was your process? What did you think? And it's the same thing I did. I just told the story differently with the lens of that job. And that for me is number one advice before we even get into like any of the skill stuff. I just think very important. It's the first touch point you have with any job. Use your resume to tell the story.
Makes sense. And as you mentioned, that companies now have like the AI tools that are essentially automating more of the manual process of looking at applications. People can use AI, like you said, to alter their resume. You have the job descriptions, that you're applying to. You could use AI essentially to get, suggestions on how to alter, what keywords to use in your resume. There's many tools that, you don't have to just sit there and think. You could use AI to kind
of... I did it manually. This
was at that time.
2.5 years ago. But with generative AI, idea generation, next level, right? Like, my product at work is a generative AI governance product, actually. So we call it data security, but it's also AI governance as well. And, I think that's part of the huge potential in this is like when we talk about productivity and a lot of these buzzwords, really what it comes down to is helping you, right? Like I'm not saying go copy paste and your resume into AI and take the output, but if you take that output and you put your brain over it, that improves your odds significantly because you have the buzzwords now, then you have your context behind a lot of those sentences. Game changer.
Makes sense. Last two questions for you. One of them is, the first one is, do you have a motto or a mantra that you live by day to day? And the next question, I'll let you think about both of them. The next one is, do you have any book suggestions and a book that you're reading? I like to ask all my guests, maybe my listeners are looking for a new book to read. I'm always looking for new books to read. So if you have a book suggestion as well, would love to hear that.
Yes. So I'll start with the book. I just finished, it's a product management book. It's called Inspired, and it talks about, product management, the 101s of it and everything. I thought that was a really good book. In terms of, I'm new to the job. I was just trying to, to immerse myself, and over break, I had some downtime. So that was one book. Looking at my bookshelf, Think Again. Think Again is another really good book that I've read. I read one other one last year that was talking about the brain and AI. I forget the name of it right now. That was another good book. So Think Again and Inspired. If I'm being completely candid with you as well, I use the app called Headway a lot. And what Headway does is Headway summarizes tons of books into like 13 to 20 minute podcasts, sort of. So I use Headway religiously on the train and during commuting for like big books that I don't want to read, but I know I want to get the TLDRs on those books. So that's one nugget that I'll drop out there. So Headway has been revolutionary for me. Then the next question was,
what is a motto or a mantra that you live by day to day? Maybe a quote. Yeah.
I think I have two. So the first one is, if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. So people would tell you this about me. I'm very rigid in the way I think, almost to a flaw, to a fault or whatever. And I believe it's like all about standing for something. I'm a very principled person. Things that like I strongly believe in, I hold on to. My values are very close to my heart. The people I care about are very close to me. And the things that I don't care for, I don't indulge. I draw a hard line there. Sometimes maybe too rigid. I'm trying to be more flexible at times as well with that, but I think that's one mantra that's really served me well. Second one is, if it was easy, everyone would do it.
I like that.
I consistently reminded myself of that. And the darkest time in recent memory I had was during the GMAT, balancing the GMAT with work. That shit sucked. I mean, I was up at 4:45 a.m. no matter where I was in the country, irrespective of time difference, grinding 2.5 hours GMAT prep, full consulting day, sometimes come back, do some more. And it was really taking a toll on me. But that's something that in everything I do, physical activity, work, I just always tell myself, if it was easy, everyone would do it. And hand in hand with that is, this too shall pass, which is, it's hard, it's a grind, but guess what? Like everything else with the 10,000 hour rule, you do it after a while, you're like, oh damn, I can't believe I remember when this was hard. And by the end of Parthenon, I was doing 5-7 diligences a week. I was like, it's the same Lawrence that the first diligence cried almost for 72 hours. But I think that's the beauty of everything, is like, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So it's not easy. Pressure is privilege is another one. So I think those three go hand in hand. Pressure is privilege. So, acknowledge where you are. The old you at some point probably wanted to be there, and now you're there. It's a privileged position. Second thing is, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So you acknowledging that you get a chance to do something. And then the third one is, was easy, everyone would do it. And what's my third one in that same realm? This too shall pass. So everything is finite. Everything has an end date. Most things, like career, whatever it is, someday that problem, everything will pass. So
what goes up must come down. What goes down must come up. Every bad day will end.
It will end 24 hours in a day only.
Just like consulting projects. There's a light
dude, that was the best part. Consulting, I pull up the SOW every day. I'm like, hey, 24th of June.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing those three, Lawrence. Thank you for giving us a candid look into the environments and roles at Deloitte, EY-Parthenon, and ServiceNow. I appreciate you sharing your journey with us. I'm sure a lot of people will listen, will walk away with a clear, image, and whoever's sharing this journey, similar path as you, they'll have a better idea of what they want to do and hopefully figure out their own path. So I appreciate you coming on Career Tea and sharing your story with us today.
No, of course. No, thanks for giving me the platform. And this is a great platform. I think it's super important to hear career nuggets from, places other than like the glass doors and the Reddits, because those have a lot of noise. And I think creating a one-on-one forum is a great thing. So yeah, thanks for what you're doing as well.
I appreciate to hear that. And that's it all for today for episode of Career Tea. If you like this conversation, please like the video. It will help us grow. And if you know anybody in the similar career path or wants to go down the similar journey, share this with them. Leave a review or a comment. And again, as always, if you have an idea or you want to hear about an industry or a different field, comment that down below and we'll try to find somebody in that field and get their story as well. Thanks for tuning in and we'll catch you guys again next week.